Hi, everyone. Welcome to CSR Talent Group's Corporate Impact Leaders Podcast. Today, we're pleased to be speaking with Mike Rizer, Executive Director, Corporate Citizenship at Ally Financial, and President of the Ally Charitable Foundation.
Thank you, Mike, for joining us today. And we're going to take about 20 to 30 minutes and talk about some experiences that Mike has had at Ally and previously, and also try to get some practical ideas and insights that might be helpful for you as a corporate impact leader. So, Mike, just wanted to start off by asking you to give us a little bit of an overview of your role at Ally, and to talk maybe a little bit about how you engage with teams, and we'll talk a little bit about the overarching CSR goals, but maybe give us some background on
Yeah,
on who you are and what you're doing at Ally.
yeah, great. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Tom. We've known each other a long time. I think you've added a lot of value to this ever-growing space of CSR, and so it's great to be with you here
Oh,
today.
thank you.
And to talk a little bit about Ally. I've been here 5 years now, and as you said, I head up corporate citizenship, and I'm president of the Ally Foundation. And I'll start there. That's kind of a neat story. I came here actually to create the charitable foundation because they didn't have one, and they wanted to do specifically some creative vehicles like program-related investments and mission-related investments, and which most of your audience will know what those are. But there are ways to provide capital to nonprofits who need it, for example, for housing loan funds, but then can repay it. But there's a need for patient low-cost capital. So we've been able to do several of those over the last few years, which have been, really fun and get us outside the normal grant giving. But as head of corporate citizenship, we do really three main things, Tom. We oversee grants and sponsorships. And our focus areas there are in three areas: affordable housing, workforce development, and financial education. Number two, of course, we oversee volunteerism, and we've got a great story to tell there, and I'd like to expand on that a little later if I could.
Right.
And then the third space is around financial education, and I said we fund that which we do, but we also create programmatic materials and deliver those as well. So grants and sponsorships, volunteerism, and financial education. So say grace over that. I've got a small team, about 10 people in Detroit and Charlotte, which we call our two hometowns. Although Ally has a online presence really globally.
Sure.
And I think the other part of your question was, or at least implied, was kind of how do we work together across the bank to get things done? But let me pause and see if you want me to keep going down that road.
Yeah, no, that would be great. I think the issue a lot of people face is that they have a limited staff. 10 is actually a good number, given some of the companies that we talk to that have fewer. But obviously the power is in being able to engage others in the company and working with your different teams across the company. So tell us a little bit about how that works and how you do that, especially both working with senior leadership and managing up a little bit, but also working across different departments. How do you get things done, and how do you collaborate?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do think, to your point, it's really relevant to those of us who've been in this business. Part of it's because we're not profit centers, right? And so we're, there's always a little bit of scarcity of resources. Though on the flip side, people love the work we do, right? And I think they like to be involved in it to some extent. So let me answer, that question in two ways. I do think it's very important to be data-driven, have good metrics around your work, and have good storytelling particularly when you are managing up. And, I'm a big believer in that last thing, storytelling. There's that quote that, you need statistics to support your argument, but people remember the story, right? I can tell you about the homeless shelter that we support, but when I tell you about Mark, who used to live on the side of the road in the barrels, and they got him fresh meals and laundry and eventually an apartment and a job, and they serve 1,000 marks a year. That's what you remember. And in fact, there's been some interesting studies around storytelling that actually gets to parts of our brain that make us more sympathetic, and make us more willing to lean into the person we're hearing from. So all that is to say, I'm a big believer in us knowing what we're doing and knowing how to tell stories about it. And I think particularly up into external audiences, that's really important. I think the other part of your question is, how do you leverage people around you in the bank? And for us, our natural partners, and I think for a lot of my peers in other institutions, this is true. You've got natural partners typically in your DEI shop or whatever you're calling that today, right? Because we have overlaps in audiences and missions and objectives. Marketing is typically a good partner too. We often have a lot of overlap in those spaces, and I think in human resources, for all those same reasons. And so we do try to contribute to them when we can, but also lever some of their resources and offerings to get our work done.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Well, let's talk about the metrics a little bit in your goals, and I'm going to combine a couple questions here a little. Yeah. So obviously there are issues that you face as a financial institution or as a bank, an online bank, and that other banks face too. And I'm curious about your CSR goals. If you can talk a little bit, and as specifically as you can, about what the goals are, what the metrics are, what's driving them, especially around related issues that banks like yours are facing.
Yeah.
And this is a big question, and who's involved in those goals? So if you could just talk about those metrics and those goals, that would be great.
Yeah. So I'll sort of come up 50,000 feet and
Sure.
tell you that again, what's kind of known in the industry as materiality analysis, or what do your constituents think you ought to be doing? And we do go through that exercise about every 3 or 4 years, which is, talking internally to our board and senior leaders and peers, but also then using a third party to help us go outside the bank to our grantees and other external audiences, vendors and the like. And that really helps us come up with at least what they think we should be doing. And we then mix that in with what skills do we have and expertise, and what's the volume of the resources that we have to actually go after problems. And at the end of the day, where can we move the needle, right? So,
Sure.
So in our business, for example, I told you that the 3 things we're focused on, healthcare issues and hunger are big problems in here like everywhere, right? And so we don't think that they aren't important, but we're big believers in going narrow and deep. And so in our work, in this corporate social responsibility world, in my world, that's how we get to that. For your audience, I would say our sustainability work sits elsewhere, but we work very closely and we are part of that same process of materiality analysis and then goal setting and Tom, it's probably as much prioritization, sometimes prioritization and then some goals, more specific goals, and then the way we measure those are we get impact reports from our grantees. So at the end of each period, if it's a 1-year grant, we get a grant back for them. How many kids were taught financial education, how many homeless people were sheltered, et cetera. For multi-year grants, they need to give us a report at the end of each year before we release those funds. And upfront, we commit to, those things that they are going to achieve by year end throughout the 3 or 5 year length of the term.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Um, well, let's talk about. It sounds like you're having some success, with some of these programs, and you're getting some great results. And I'd be curious about, some success stories and also some of the challenges that you've faced, because
Yeah,
obviously, what a lot of companies are facing, I think, is it is hard to move the needle on some of these issues, especially um, given the limited resources that some companies have or the expertise, as you say. But can you talk a little bit about what you've seen as successes and also some of
yeah,
the challenges that you faced?
sure. Yeah. I would say one of the successes that I'm really proud about is the national average for volunteerism in companies is about 1 in 4 people, about 23%. At Ally, it's over 50%. So we have
Hmm.
a very, very engaged employee base. So Tom, we're a company of about 11,000. So our people, we can barely create enough events for folks to go out, whether it's
Hmm.
swinging a hammer or loading up a backpack for a kid at school or wherever the case might be. We do a lot of that, and that's it's very empowering. And I think, people ask me what is the secret sauce there. I really think it comes from the top, that we've got leaders who take culture seriously, and they're held accountable, and they model it. And so they're out doing those very same things. Number one. Number two, we give people 8 paid hours to volunteer away from work.
Hmm.
Um, and three, our managers abide by that, and they within, certain limits, they empower their employees to go out and do this volunteer activity. So it's been a really good recipe, I think, for success. And then, as you know, it's a little circular, because you go out and you do things like that, and it feeds your soul, and then you come back and you feel engaged about working at a place that prioritizes that, and you've had the opportunity to see it play out, if you will.
Hmm.
You asked me for success. I'd say that's something I'm really proud of, because we're about double the national average around that.
Any tips for companies? Because it sounds like you're in a good position with leaders that care and understand how important it is to create a culture around that. And obviously, not every company and not every corporate impact leader has
Yeah.
that um, opportunity to be in a place like that. Any suggestions for people in that position where they may be struggling a little bit to get leadership to be engaged? And in all fairness, some leaders, have a lot on their plate,
Yeah.
and may not think this is their top priority. But tell me if there's any sort of practical tips you could give
Yeah.
other people in this position.
Sure. Yeah. And the thing that comes to mind for me is, regardless of where I've worked, or other places I've seen on stages at conferences and things, all leaders talk about culture, right?
Yeah.
Everybody talks about culture. And of course, culture is different everywhere. But I think one way to sell this kind of work upstream is of the impact that it has to culture. Companies will
Mhm.
spend lots of money and calories around what they think drives culture. And there
Yeah.
are many other things that do it. But I firmly believe that this kind of work and modeling it, uh, giving people the ability to do it, giving them the freedom. Frankly, I didn't say this, Tom, but I think letting people follow their hearts, not saying we're going to be, and this is a worthy cause, but everybody's going to show up and march down Main Street Saturday morning for the heart drive. But rather, Tom, what moves you? What's important in your life? And
Yeah.
go do that. Go do that. So I think it's helping people, and it's helping senior leaders understand that this is a huge way to drive engagement, which we know from lots and lots of data, right? That engagement drives good customer service,
Yeah.
good customer retention, good sales, right?
So let's tie that back a little bit, because I hear this from companies all the time, that there's the balance between obviously allowing employees to go after their passion and pursue things that they really care about and supporting them in that regard, but also with your core areas here, financial education and workforce development, et cetera. Is there a way that you encourage or incentivize employees to align with those areas, and what do you do in that regard?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I'm glad you asked that because that is a bit of a nuance. So
Mm.
we when as part of our volunteer work, in addition to hands-on, we do help sort of marry people up to board activity that they like. And when we do that, we do say, if someone comes and says, what moves you? What do you like? Is it kids? Is it food insecurity? Is it housing? What is it? And if they have something like they're really into pets, they're really into animals, we'll help them get to that place on a shelter, animal shelter board. Because we want them to be happy and doing what they want to do. But many times they come to us and say, I want to have this experience. I want to lead. This is generally the way I think about the world, but where would you put me? And in those cases, we try to get them in those three silos, if you will.
Sure.
So it's a little bit of a hybrid approach
Mhm.
where we try to honor their hearts, but also when they're indifferent, if you will, to align so that, and I think where you're headed is, we're spending money in these three areas. We'd like to align as much as we can to get our impact to be the greatest, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's circle back to that impact, because you mentioned that you do a materiality assessment, I think every 3 years, and you're talking to your stakeholders. And I'm curious around their expectations and what you're seeing, and how you might shift a little bit in your three areas to adapt to those new expectations. And let's focus on employees, because it sounds like that's really where you're doing a lot of your core work and having some great successes. For those corporate impact leaders out there that, again, may not have the same engagement with their employees, what are some of the things that you've seen over the 5 years you've been there that have helped you maybe adapt or adjust your approach to engaging employees more? And maybe you just touched on some of those, but anything in specific that you've seen evolve over those 5 years?
Well, of course, when we came through the pandemic,
Yeah.
your listeners, we had to figure out a lot of stuff there, right? So,
Sure.
how did we do stuff remotely? And then we started to come back hybrids. I think a lot of us have a similar story there. I would say one of the things, Tom, in our business, we have a fair amount of people who are in call centers. And so how do we honor that? It's one thing for somebody who's in sales to take 8 hours off and go volunteer. It's a very different thing when you're at a desk and you're serving customers, right? So we've worked with we've tried to work and be flexible with managers so that, again, we can honor those folks and give them some experiences that they can pull off. Sometimes it's doing things in the kind of on shifts, and we've got it in the lunchroom, and you go in and do things for a little bit and come back, or that kind of thing in that situation. But I think the overall, I would say the pandemic made us be flexible and a little creative, and then even coming back as we're many of our places are hybrid, and so we've had to figure out how do we keep people engaged and honor. They may not be in the office every day and the like.
Yeah, I think that's a struggle many people are
Yeah.
working on right now, especially with remote work. Well, Mike, thank you for this. And I want to wrap up with a question. Given that you and I have both been in the space for, let's say, quite some time. A while, yes, which I appreciate, knowing you for so long. I wanted to ask you about, three things that you might offer as advice. As a corporate impact leader, anything that you can provide people, and it can be anything, about, how you've been able to get things done, or what you've seen over the years that has helped you become a successful corporate impact leader? Any
Yeah.
tips or advice?
Yeah.
Can be anything.
I'd say three things. I'd say be really clear at the outset on your goals.
Hmm.
I'd say number two, get the right people in the room to execute it, and then be able to measure results.
Yeah.
If you're, you can expect if you inspect, right? And then that feeds back into, are you really being successful, and do you have to make adjustments?
Yeah. Good advice for anything in life, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, listen, thank you, Mike, so much. It's been a pleasure talking again and reconnecting.
Absolutely.
Any other thoughts or final comments, or are you good?
No, I appreciate your leadership in the industry. It's
Thank you.
been the excitement of it has been that it's changed a lot, and it's good to have really good voices in the room around these super important issues.
Well, I appreciate that. And thank you, everybody, for checking out this podcast. We'll be talking to a number of different corporate impact leaders across different industries, and hopefully providing you with some good insights and practical advice. But thank you, Mike. Really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, Tom.